Welcome classic rock fans to a kind of response to your questions type video. This is as close as I get to audience participation, so sort of make the most of it, I guess. In talking of audience participation, I did this poll, if you remember, a while ago, on which band I should do a kind of a worst to best sort of album ranking, Jethro Tull, AC/DC or Black Sabbath. Well, Black Sabbath have come out overwhelmingly as the winners in this one, so I shall be doing that video in the next 10 days, I suspect, probably next weekend. Anyway, I was interested, the first question I posed to you was, excuse me for looking at my phone, any ideas for a classic album review? And I sort of looked at some of the albums that you suggested. Chicago's first album, it wasn't called Chicago, it was called Chicago Transit Authority, or something, I think that was right. Interesting first album. I don't know if you know it, but it's actually being remastered or remixed for a 50th anniversary re-release. That might be worth checking out. And the Velvet Underground's, the Nico sort of Banana album, it certainly should be done. It's certainly on my radar to do it, but a lot of these albums have been sat on my radar for a long time. I've always wanted to do Radiohead's OK Computer, but I've been planning to do that for the last 2 years. I will get around to it. Lizard King Vinyl, I hope you're well, suggests Houses of the Holy. Yes, I could. Yes, that would be a good one to do. I've done a Led Zeppelin album, haven't I? Which one did I do? It was Led Zeppelin 4, wasn't it? But Houses of the Holy would be a good one. Dire Straits, Love Over Gold. I haven't listened to that for donkey's years. That's the one with Private Investigations on, isn't it? God, I wonder if I listened to those albums now. I wonder if they would sound really dated. I don't know. I must give them Wish You Were Here and Animals by Pink Floyd. I think if I was to do Pink Floyd, my inclination would be to Animals, because it's, I think Animals is kind of eclipsed by Dark Side of the Moon, yet it's kind of overshadowed by The Wall in some respects. It was always kind of a bit of a lost album, but it's wonderful. Waters' sort of dystopian sort of beast fable. It's just fantastic. I think I'll have to do Animals. I was thinking of Atom Heart Mother as well, because that's one of my favourite Floyd albums. Camel. Camel would be a great one to do, a very overlooked band in many respects. Some of the later ones, I remember having Stationary Traveller on vinyl years ago. That was the one, all set in East Berlin. That might be an interesting one, unless you can suggest a better one, perhaps. Jared Lertle, forgive me if I say these names wrong, do forgive me. Fleetwood Mac, if I was to do Fleetwood Mac, it certainly wouldn't be Rumours. I think there's been enough said about Rumours as it is. I'd be interested in doing Tusk, or some of the stuff pre-Lindsey Buckingham, and what's her face? Stevie Nicks, of course. Okay, now I can tell I'm not really with it this morning, can you? ELO, Queen, Queen actually would be a great one to do. I think their album Sheer Heart Attack is perhaps their best album, in my opinion, of course. The Doors should be done, of course. I think their debut album is perhaps the best debut album I've ever heard. Bowie is another shocking oversight on my part. Black Sabbath, I mean, I've done Paranoid, but I think Masters of Reality would be one I'd like to do. Or perhaps something from the Dio era. Traffic, Mr. Fantasy, I think I would probably do. Probably a rather obvious choice. Faces, Cream, Deep Purple. I've done in rock with Deep Purple. I wouldn't mind doing something like Burn or Machine Head or something like that. The Allman Brothers would be good. And 10 Years After. Purple Music Geek says Buddy Holly and the Crickets, Chirping Crickets. That'd be an interesting one to do, because I'm looking into sort of going back to some of the albums released in the 1950s. I've done Sinatra's Wee Small Hours, and I've done the debut Elvis Presley record, but this one would be a great one. In fact, on your suggestion, I actually went out and I bought it. I used to have it on vinyl years ago, but I thought I'd give it a listen to with a view to perhaps doing a review of that one. Captain Beefheart, absolutely. Well, I'll probably choose Trampmaster Replica. Again, obvious choice, I guess. Brian Eno, I don't know enough about Brian Eno's solo stuff, to be honest with you. Maybe you can recommend a really good Brian Eno album that I should check out. Chris Squire, of course, Fish Out of Water would be another good one to do. I really miss the sound of Chris Squire playing in Yes. Jethro Tull, Stormwatch. I've done a few Tull videos already. If I was to do another Tull video, I'd be inclined to do Stand Up, or perhaps Songs from the Wood, or Heavy Horses. Kate Bush, Hounds of Love is an interesting suggestion. It's an album I've not listened to for 30 years, to be honest with you. I've got the Kate Bush box set up there on my shelf. I've not got around to listening to it yet, but I've always wanted to do Kate Bush, but I think if I was to do Kate Bush, I'd be more inclined to do Never Forever, which is my favourite album. Thin Lizzy Renegade or Pink Floyd Animals? Animals, definitely, I think. How about a live album? Tony, I can't pronounce his surname, can't even read it, I need glasses. I'm not a big fan of live albums, really. I tend to do classic album reviews, tend to be looking at a kind of a studio album as such, rather than considering a live performance. And good idea, though. Sheer Heart Attack by Queen, yes, has to be done. ABC Lexicon of Love, I don't know. You guys are really educating me here. I have to listen to some of these albums. Aphrodite 666, the album I used to have on CD some years ago. I haven't listened to it for years, but it'd be a good one to do. Fleetwood Mac, Then Play On. That's the one with the gorilla on the front, isn't it? Is it? I think it is. That's certainly one to be worth doing. I'm interested in that kind of transitional period from when Peter Green leaves, but to before Buckingham and Nicks actually sort of join. It's interesting to get the band to kind of sort of forge an identity in many respects. Deep Purple, Who Do We Think We Are? Much overlooked album, really, to be honest with you. You're quite right, that's one Mary Long on, isn't it? Again, if I was to do Purple, I'd probably be inclined to do Machine Head, or Fireball is one that's overlooked a little bit as well, or perhaps Perfect Strangers was a great album, I think, or possibly one of the Coverdale fronted albums. Anyway, so some of your questions, let's look at those. Fish's solo career, question mark, question mark. Not really sure what's been asked here. Are you asking, what do I think of Fish's solo career, or why have I not done any videos on Fish's solo career? Well, there's a lot of artists I've not done videos on, simply because I just haven't got the time, or haven't gotten round to it, I suppose. But I remember when he left Marillion, I was certainly in the Fish camp rather than Marillion, and I abandoned Marillion in favour of Fish's new album, which was Vigil in the Wilderness of Mirrors at the time. Saw him a couple of times on that tour, but lost track of his solo stuff. I went to work abroad for a while, so I lost track of a lot of his solo stuff, and I must reacquaint myself with it. I enjoyed some of the songs off his last album, which I saw him perform live, so maybe I should pay more attention to Fish's solo career. Interesting question here. When do you think the art of the album became a thing, as in when was the first well-crafted rock album with a beginning, middle, end that wasn't just a collection of songs to be packaged and sold to the people? Interesting question, really. Certainly in the mid-60s, I think there was a kind of a challenging of sort of musical orthodoxy, really, where albums were to be seen as a kind of a statement of artistic intent, rather than just as you say, a random collection of songs produced as a product, really, to be consumed by teenagers. So you'd have to look at artists like Zappa, and the Freak Out album, the Beach Boys, of course, the Beatles, definitely. They were all sort of experimenting with musical form, and producing kind of self-contained works of art in themselves in many respects. Nod obviously has to go to Dylan. But if you're asking me here what is the first concept album, I've done a video on the concept album which you can check out on my channel. But when we talk about what is the first concept album, we have to be clear in our minds what we think a concept album actually is. If you're saying that a concept album has to be a narrative, or it has to be concerned with a specific idea or theme, then I suppose you're looking at kind of sort of mid-60s, possibly Zappa's Freak Out. The Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's is kind of a half concept album in many respects. You could even argue that perhaps Days of Future Past by the Moody Blues is the first full-blown concept album, but it's all academic, really. It's all down to opinion. However, if you are to suggest that, well, if you broaden your definition of a concept album and say, well, a concept album can be the evocation of a specific atmosphere, or the exploration of a specific atmosphere, then you'd have to go further back. You'd have to look at the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, and even 10 years before that with Sinatra's In the Wee Small Hours, which I've done great classic album reviews on both those albums. Do check them out. If you watch Rick Wakeman's wonderful programme on When Albums Ruled the World, he goes as far back as Woody Guthrie's Dust Bowl Ballads, which was released around about 1940, as being a contender for the first concept album. So it's hard, really. It comes down to what your definition of a concept album is and how broad you're going to be. What is your vinyl collection like? Joseph Harrison asks. What's your vinyl collection like? Do you have the first record you brought? The first record I actually brought was a 7-inch single, Stand and Deliver by Adam and the Ants, which I saved up my pennies to buy. I have to disappoint you, actually. My vinyl collection is non-existent virtually now. I've had to sell a lot of my vinyl simply because we just did not have the space for it. I live in a house with 3 children. Maybe I should have gotten rid of the children. I think that would have been a better idea. Subsequently, my music collection now is all sort of on CD or sort of high-res audio files. I do like sort of tactile stuff, actually having stuff and unwrapping it and looking at it, really. So I still buy a lot of physical sort of box sets and things like that. SW Studio Productions, did you get this idea from the one I'm doing? No, but I'd be interested in the one you're doing. This comes really from an idea from... I did this as a response to that Rush video I went kind of viral by my standards anyway. Purple Music Geek, what are your thoughts on the music of the people who in the day the music died? Plane Crash in '59. In awe, basically. I mean, they were just fantastic musicians and songwriters in their own right. Of course, Ritchie Valens kind of spawned an almost subgenre of sort of music which has been carried on by other artists like Los Lobos and other people like that. And who doesn't like La Bamba, of course? I actually have an interesting Buddy Holly story for you, really. When my mother and father lived in Hounslow, my father would often do late shifts at the airport, and my mother would sneak out to see gigs. Her and a friend used to go out, and they saw Buddy Holly play Hammersmith, in Hammersmith somewhere. It wasn't the Hammersmith Odeon, because in the 50s it was a cinema, I believe, so it must have been maybe the Hammersmith Palais or something like that. But that was about 1958. They also went sorry, I've got a cold. They also went out and saw Bill Haley and the Comets, and they had tickets to go and see Jerry Lee Lewis, but of course Jerry Lee Lewis cancelled due to all the controversy with him shagging a 13-year-old girl, of course. Anyway, so the bit of interesting sort of rock and roll trivia for you. Not that you're interested in the bands my mother saw. What do you think makes an album progressive or classifies it as prog rock over classic rock? Well, I'd say that kind of spirit of experimentation, that sort of ambition, musical ambition, the exploration of an idea or concept on an album, but not necessarily so. Certainly kind of a cross-pollination of different sort of musical ideas that sort of melded and explored, variations of time signatures, and things like that, really. I guess all those sort of things, originally called art rock or prog rock or progressive pop in sort of the late 60s. But for me, it's ambition, really, and capes, of course. Has to involve capes. Paul Ayres says, us music lovers admit that our favourite albums or top 10 lists can change often. They certainly do. As of today, what are your favourite 5 albums? I have to excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. My favourite 5 albums. There's some perennial favourites that seem to permanently sort of occupy my top 5. Albums that I have to listen to at least once a year. That would have to be not necessarily in order. Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys, Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, the Beatles' White Album, or Abbey Road. Really, I couldn't. Those two would keep sort of moving in and out. It'd be one of those two. The Stones' Exile on Main Street, and possibly Yes's Topographic Oceans or Moving Pictures by Rush. Would have to be in there. Odyssey and Oracle by the Zombies is another album that I have to listen to at least once a year. I realise I've gone over 5 now, haven't I? The Who, Tommy. I should quit while I'm ahead. But certainly those albums sort of jostle for position for the sort of top 5 in my own personal Parthenon, if you like. How important are lyrics compared to music itself? Well, I suppose it depends on the music. I mean, you get the protest songs of Dylan. Obviously, the guitar seems to merely take second fiddle to Dylan's voice and protest lyrics. But you get a band like I know Pink Floyd is the best example, really, when it was a wonderful convergence of musical ideas and lyrics and concept. They were sublime, really. I mean, Dark Side of the Moon is the pinnacle of their achievement, in my opinion, and I love that movement towards Dark Side of the Moon. But when it starts to become Waters' lyrics and ideas, and the music suddenly becomes secondary almost, I feel, and I think the band really suffer. Often, the best ideas are explored, or the best emotions are explored, and through the use of a guitar phrase or musical wonderful bit of keyboard flourish. To me, I think the music is as important as lyrics on some of the greatest albums. I certainly sort of rank anyway. Do you like outlaw country? Well, I like Willie Nelson and Johnny Cash, people you've mentioned. I like those very much. I don't know a lot about this genre. Johnny Cash had quite a lot of records by him. I used to have the ones he did live in Folsom Prison, and I love those early Sun recordings he did. But it's a genre really that I could perhaps explore more. Perhaps if you could suggest a few records, I'd certainly give them a listen. Anyway, I think that's it. That's it for your questions. I hope I've done them some justice. Anyway, thank you for watching. Check out my next video. The next video is going to be Black Sabbath, Worst to Best, the albums ranked. That'll be within the next 10 or so days. Do click like, please subscribe, share these videos, not this one so to speak, but certainly the album reviews and things like that. I need to get the subs up. And thank you for watching.